So let's chat about the governance aspect for a moment. And as we dive in, we're in the business of measuring ESG brand and reputation, and we have a 7-driver model for reputation, a 3-driver for our ESG model. Brad, can you talk about the governance aspect of our model, just level set before we dive into a couple of questions?
When we think about governance from a reputational perspective, it's a little bit different than I think the way the financial community has usually thought about governance. So we're not talking about things like board structure or whether or not the CEO and the chairman's seats are separated and have different roles and responsibilities. Instead, what we're talking specifically about is the perception of the organization around a couple of key attributes. So things like, is it perceived as being an ethical company? Is it perceived as being open and honest and transparent in how it interacts with stakeholders? And here's the thing about governance that's especially interesting is that post-financial crisis, which I know was a long time ago, but post-financial crisis, what we found was that governance has risen as a driver of reputation consistently over the past 7 or 8 years. And in all industries, with no exception, governance is among the top 3 most important reputation drivers. And in some industries, you bring up pharma, for example, other industries like usually banking, financial services in general, governance is the most important reputation driver. And here's why the governance attribute or the driver matters so much, is that it has a almost perfect correlation, this perception of ethical, open, and transparent and honest, to what we call license to operate related behaviors. So it does affect purchase behavior. It does affect recommend. It does affect whether someone would work for you. But most importantly, it affects things like benefit of the doubt in a crisis. It affects things like trust. It affects things like willing to defend in an argument. And so what that means is that those companies that have strong governance perceptions tend to make it through crisis situations far more quickly and far more easily, with far less negative impact on financial performance and otherwise. And those that have poor governance scores have an exceptionally difficult time making it through crisis situations, even if they didn't do anything. But it's because people don't trust them or believe them to start. And so if you're accused of something and they already believe you're not a good company, then you have a very hard time making it through that. So governance is a critically important driver for all companies in terms of driving the perception and support that they need.
I really like the explanation you gave there around the license to operate and crises come faster than ever, it seems. These all sound like good things, Brad. What is your most common tip that you give companies when they ask you for advice around governance?
Well, as I like to say, you can't tell people that you're an honest company. You can't tell them that you're an ethical company, but you can prove it through your actions. And I think what you find is that governance and the importance of openness and transparency is something that's driven from the top. So the communications team needs to organize and align with leadership to ensure that they have a very clear understanding of what governance means. And governance, by the way, isn't just talking, it's not just acting, and it's not just people. It's about how you deliver products, it's about how you deliver services, it's about how you interact with your community. So just the key thing here is you have to be aligned. It starts from the top, and you have to be actively communicating about areas where you're providing that transparency and openness.
That story has to be always on. And that's a challenge and a shift for communications people, because they're generally focused on the customer, either telling great stories about how they're achieving with their customers or selling products and services. So now to be able to make a governance story interesting is hard. It's genuinely hard. It's an imperative. There's no way out. It has to happen. But, sympathetically, it is a challenge. So to bring creative teams together, to bring the right leadership within the organization, but then also the voices within the company who can really be the advocates all the way down, live the change, be the force for good, and the voice around ESG within the organization. And then outside as well, there's a broad communications imperative here that is a fascinating one, but it's complicated.
One other thing I would add is when we do work with our clients on this topic specifically, when we do governance-oriented activities, what we do is we ask them to think about all of the different areas of reputation, products, services, innovation, leadership, et cetera. And we say, every single one of those needs to have a governance strategy around it. So how do you create transparency in how you deliver product?
Right.
How does leadership become more transparent? How do you innovate and communicate openly and transparently about the innovation related activities? So that's really the key, which is governance touches everything, and you need a strategy for all the pieces that it touches, and it has to be aligned at the top.
That's what I really like about our particular governance driver, and the use of perception data as the real hallmark of rigorous measurement of whether people are open and transparent. Because as you say, you can't claim honesty if others don't believe it. So it's a really nice way to actually help companies move forward.